All you Ethic cuties and the 40% of you who have still not subscribed to the Ethicsverse, welcome to the coolest place to be every Thursday at noon Eastern. And this is the coolest place to be every quarter when we have the one and only Matt Kelly and the one and only Karen Moore on to talk about hot topics in ethics and compliance. Everyone says this is their favorite episode, and so it's my favorite for sure. So welcome. Let's get a massive emoji explosion for these guys. I'm going to run through some quick announcements. Drop into the chat where you're coming from today. I love scrolling through the chat after our episodes and seeing where everybody is from. It's really awesome to see. And also drop your LinkedIn URL in the chat. You're going to hear me say this all the time, so I hope you don't skip through this. I hope you don't wait, 5 minutes after we start, because you got to hear it. You got to be building your network. You have to be engaging in this really unique thing that is this ethics and compliance community that we're all a part of. Because, like I always say, you get no bonus points for reinventing the wheel. So connect with someone today. Also, you do get bonus points for coming on July 23rd to Ethicsverse Day. Everybody is super pumped about Ethicsverse Day. Also dropping, see, you hear? I can hear the crowd roar. Also drop in, here is our lineup for Ethicsverse Day. We have a ton of awesome sessions. Oops, I just changed it. There we go. We have a ton of awesome sessions. So we're starting the day off with Predictably Compliant, one of my all-time faves, Dan Ariely. I've read all of his books multiple times. He is a behavioral science absolute expert. If you don't know who he is, Google him. He's awesome. So he's starting out with session 1. Then we're going to have a great knockdown, drag out, blood sport AI debate in session 2 at 1:15. Session 3 is our DOJ Insider Perspectives keynote. Every single year we get so much positive feedback about this session where we can really get into the mind of DOJ and see what is top of mind for those folks. And then finally, we have the great women in compliance, some of my all-time faves coming on for the last session, and it's going to be an Ask Me Anything session. So we have a bunch of questions. You can drop some more in here that will work into the session. We have a bunch of questions that we've aggregated that we're going to be covering with the great women in compliance. So as I'm going through the rest of the announcements, drop which of these sessions, 1, 2, 3, or 4, you are most excited about, and bonus points for saying all 3. Also, get ready to get your freaking mind blown. We have this really cool new tool that's available for free, of course, because I love you, to know which policies you need. We just launched our Policy Plus platform. People are absolutely loving it. It cuts out a ton of work. The whole thesis is that AI does the work, you make the decisions, and of course, we'll adhere to all the AI policies that are out there. We take care of the privacy issue, the hallucination issue, help you control where those humans in the room. And I'm seeing all 3. It's 4. It's 4 sessions this year. Okay, you control where those humans in the loop are. But what in a lot of these conversations we're having, people are wondering, well, what policies do I need? So we have put together a cool tool called the Policy Checklist. This will give you templates for a bunch of policies. These are not cheap one-page policies. These are very elaborate policies that you can leverage for free. So if you don't have budget to get involved with Policy Plus, all good. Definitely check out this tool. So there should be a link in the chat. I love that. A lot of all 4s here. Very good. There should be a link in the chat for this platform or for this page. You can go and you can, put in your industry, your organization size, some things like that. And it's going to spit out a bunch of policies that are recommended, that you absolutely need, recommended ones you may want to think about. And it can give you a place to get started if you have some holes in your policy management process. So with that, also, obviously, download the benchmark report. I talk about this all the time. I continue to get DMs every single week about, oh, man, there's a great benchmark report. Gave me a new way to think about my program. So definitely download that. That should be available on the console. And let's get a massive emoji explosion one more time for the one and only Matt Kelly, coolest guy in compliance. We're going to be covering a ton of topics today. He has a lot of great topics for us to talk about. And if you ever want a preview of what should be top of mind, you definitely want to follow the Radical Compliance page and definitely follow Matt on LinkedIn. He puts out great content constantly. I love his blog. He has a newsletter that won't be spammed. And put your name and your email, or I guess it's just your email address. Put your email address in this thing. If you are not following Matt and you are not on the Radical Compliance newsletter, get out of the industry because you don't even care about compliance. Also, we got the one and only Karen Moore. Karen Moore runs Sounding Board Consultancy. She is phenomenal. She's our guest spotlight. It's a highlight of my quarter every time you're on. Karen, how's it going?
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Highlight for me too.
All right. I love it. All right. Over to you, Matt. Let's dive in.
All right. Thank you very much, Nick. And yes, as Nick just said, we have a lot of stuff to go over this quarter, which is true every quarter, but it seems to be especially true this quarter. And then this is more like a current events wrap up for listeners. So if you do have questions about things you've seen, things you want us to talk about, things that are on your mind, you can pop that right into the attendee chat as well. And we'll try and get to that as quick as we can. We love hearing comments from readers. But this is just stuff that I have noticed over the last quarter here. And we are going to start with, somewhat to my surprise, some real and interesting enforcement actions. Both of them are actually on sanctions, which is a bit surprising that, yes, we've all heard that the Trump administration is very hard on sanctions, especially if it involves Iran or China or some of the more traditional adversaries. But at the same time, there's a lot. And one thing that I wanted to tease out maybe from Karen and from Nick and anybody listening is how much companies are or are not really equipped or in position to deal with an elevated sanctions enforcement climate. But here's what we're doing. Here's what's going on. The first thing that happened, this was, I think, about 6 weeks ago, the Treasury Department in the United States fined FTI Consulting $1.05 million for violating sanctions by dealing with a Russian state-owned bank. And what was interesting here, these infractions happened 2019, 2020, 21, right around there, is that FTI was approached. Could you help provide some economic analysis for this bank, VTB, which was caught up in litigation in Singapore? And a global law firm came and asked FTI Consulting, could you do it? And FTI immediately said, well, we can't do business with VTB Bank because they are a sanctioned Russian entity. And somehow they came up with the idea that FTI Consulting would provide services to the bank, but they would invoice the law firm and send the invoices to the law firm, which would then collect the money owed from VTB Bank, which would pay the law firm, which would then pay off FTI Consulting. And the Office of Foreign Assets Control, OFAC, which enforces sanctions, basically flipped out and said, you cannot do this. And their exact phrase, which was, that which you cannot do directly, you cannot do indirectly either. And to demonstrate the point, the base penalty for these offenses was going to be $525,000. And OFAC doubled that to $1.05 million and expressly said in their settlement order, we are aggravating the penalty, elevating the penalty to send a message to all other persons who might be thinking about doing this, don't do it. So that was the first thing that struck me was, when was the last time a regulator actually said, we are escalating the penalty purely so we can send a message to everyone, look at this, make sure you're not doing it. We're that upset about it. Karen, you've been also following enforcement for a long time. Have you seen anything like this? Or what else strikes you about this FTI case? And it really was a jarring thing when I saw that come down the pike.
Yeah, I think what's jarring here is that such a sophisticated company like FTI didn't know better. And on the surface, this seems like a couple of duh moments, that if you can't do it one way, you probably can't do it the other. Now, to leave the door open a crack, and I'm not sure, Matt, because you've looked at this pretty closely, I believe it was the law firm in Singapore that contacted FTI and said, hey, we're representing a client in litigation in Singapore. We'd like some economic analysis here. Can you please do the economic analysis? Now, at that point, it feels like a kind of no-brainer that FTI, knowing who their client was, would have said, hey, we've got a problem here. We don't think we can provide you with these services because they're benefiting this sanctioned bank. So one thing that interested me was that OFAC went after FTI and not after the law firm, at least not on the surface or not yet. We don't know. The law firm, I have to confess, I did a little bit of Googling and research, is the Singapore very well-established law firm, which is part of the Dentons Global Worldwide. So again, law firms should have known better as well.
Right.
That one surprised me as well. So I think, a bunch of things here. One is who was responsible for this type of sanctions check at FTI? Was it compliance? I know they have some really good compliance folks there. And I think maybe one issue where things fall between the cracks of who owns what in the organization, giving them a little bit of credit. Other thing that interested me, no voluntary self-disclosure. I think, once FTI should have figured out, oops, we didn't do something so smart, they maybe should have gone to OFAC, even on a no-names basis, to try and get a little bit of clarity there. They should have done that from the outset. Do we need a license to do this? And I think that the other interesting thing to me here is that in the decision, OFAC also said that, we're not going to fine you too much because it was non-egregious behavior and it's kind of your first time. So they did give them a little bit of leeway there. But, I know we want to also get into the extension of credit issue, which to me is the most interesting part of this whole thing, because the less interesting part is, why didn't you know better? And that just seemed like a dumb arrangement to begin with. But the where they got caught on the extension of credit, I think for me is the more interesting nuance here.
Well, a couple of points to add in color for the listeners. First off, excellent work at digging up the name of the law firm. I did not get around to doing that, and I was curious who they were. But people were asking in the comments here, did the law firm get sanctioned? Not to our awareness, not to our knowledge, no. But according to the settlement, and FTI has not, to my knowledge, put out a formal statement about any of this. You're right that it's a large company, and I don't think $1 million fine is a significant amount for them. But according to the settlement, FTI, the salespeople, did go to FTI's compliance team and ask, can we do this? And it's more that they were trying to find a way to make it work, not this is a bad idea, don't do it. And I was really surprised at that. They did try to self-disclose, but OFAC gave them no credit for it. I'm not clear on why. Like, did OFAC already know about it somehow? But the other thing that struck me, like, you're right, Karen, that there is this arrangement, this category, which I did not know about in sanctions, that you can be semi-sanctioned, that you can do business with a little bit of business with these entities if they pay you back really quickly and it's not much money. So they offered this service to VTB Bank. And then icing on the cake, VTB Bank stiffed them on the invoices. And as soon as they stiffed them, it became not an invoice that was overdue. It became an extension of debt to a sanctioned party. And that is a big no-no. And that was like a secondary sanctions violation on top of, you came up with this man in the middle scheme and we're not buying it. You can't do it. But just all around, I look at it and I see so many listeners saying, what were they thinking? They should have known better. That's exactly what OFAC said in its settlement order too, that yes, this was a non-egregious offense, but FTI is a large and sophisticated company and it should have known better. And yet this happened. But I mean, Nick, I don't know what your thoughts here, but I look at it and I'm kind of astonished. Like, how did anybody think this was a good idea? And yet it happened.
Well, I mean, I don't think people wake up trying to violate sanctions. I think they wake up trying to get revenue. And there was some partner or somebody who was contacted there and they want to try to figure out a way to make it work. I mean, it sounds like, they went to the compliance department. Perhaps the compliance department was trying to not be the office of no and saying, okay, how can we kind of make this work? And it might be one of these situations, like Karen said, that sort of fell through the cracks. At the highest level, I think, the OFAC, whoever the regulatory body is, I think they care about economic logic, not like paperwork, not this sort of Russian, nesting doll or like shell game. Like, it's really about who benefits from it. And, the cautionary tale here, I mean, they're trying to send a message. Candidly, I don't know what kind of message they're sending with $1 million for a company as big as FTI, but they're trying to send a message no less by doubling it. I just think it's kind of a cautionary tale. Like if it's close, if it's too close for comfort, or if there's some argument that can be made, then, maybe you have to kind of steer clear of it given the environment and the way it is right now.
Now, I'll come back to FTI in a moment, but I also want to then loop in the next interesting enforcement action we've seen, because it was also about sanctions, but in a different way, where the Commerce Department fined Bosch, the German manufacturer, and everybody who's momentarily thinking, wait, didn't they make my dishwasher? Probably they did. They made mine. They made my refrigerator. They make a lot of consumer appliances, but they also make microsensors and very advanced equipment like that. And the Commerce Department fined Bosch $36 million for building and shipping goods to Huawei, the Chinese telecom giant, which has been under sanctions since 2019. They were shipping these microsensors and software that I think are for self-driving cars and self-piloting vehicles, and could be potential military applications. But what got to me was that Bosch is a foreign company that had a foreign factory, and they were building their goods with foreign-based components and selling it to a foreign customer. So how on earth is that a U.S. export controls issue? Well, it is a violation of the foreign direct product rule, because the technology they were using in their manufacturing plants is based on U.S. technology. So the foreign good is a direct product of U.S. technology, even though the components you're putting together in the plant might be foreign sourced. You're using technology in the plant to do that assembly that came from the U.S. So it was the foreign direct product rule. What was interesting here is that Bosch is an enormous company with tens of thousands of employees, and they were the Bureau of Industry and Security within the Commerce Department. They faulted them for having exactly 2 export control compliance people in a company of 80,000 or something like that. One of them was dedicated full-time. The other was a part-time assistant. So they misunderstood the rule. And then they gave bad advice to the trade compliance team in headquarters in Germany, which then gave bad advice to the actual Bosch subsidiaries making the things and selling them to Huawei. And it became this chain of errors. And it was just astonishing to me that they did get a declination on criminal prosecution from the Justice Department because they self-disclosed it. How did they eventually figure out they violated this? We don't know. The orders don't say. But they did cooperate. Everything's great. And the remediation, they hired 66 additional trade compliance professionals, up from, I don't know how many, because we don't know how many are specifically on export controls, how many are in Germany, how many are in the US. We have no idea. But they hired a boatload of extra compliance people. So Karen and Nick, if you have thoughts about this case, I'm happy to hear them. But the through line I see between FTI and Bosch is that both times we have sanctions enforcement, and companies don't have any skill or capacity or know-how to be able to actually comply with these things. It's kind of like FCPA enforcement around 2012. You knew it was a thing. They're enforcing it. We don't know how to build a process to handle that. I feel like we are now at that point with a whole bunch of sanctions compliance issues, which are many and complicated. But Karen, what's your take on this?
Yeah, again, so many thoughts here. First of all, I think, this quarter is the first time that our slate of topics doesn't include an FCPA. So we're going to substitute another extraterritorial act. This foreign direct product rule is something, that could be, arguably could be overly complicated for a small company that maybe is contracting with the U.S. company on manufacturing. I can see where this could slip through the cracks, but kind of like with FTI. FTI, we had a big U.S. company, a really large global law firm, an enormous state-owned Russian bank. Here we've got Bosch, which is an absolutely enormous company producing these micro electromechanical systems, MEMS, which are very clearly subject to export control for national security reasons. It's one of the major prongs of the foreign direct product rule. So to not have people in the US controlling what happens when there are foreign-based products that are built on these MEMS is astonishing to me first. Secondly, this is an intra-company issue. It's Bosch to Bosch. It's not Bosch to some small manufacturer. Maybe something got lost in the contracting process or got lost on the other end. You know, it feels like the German headquartered Bosch should have also been pulling and asking and been educated on these issues. So, you know, that astounded me as well. And one of the things that, you know, harkens back to my really first moments as a baby lawyer clerking at the U.S. Court of International Trade is that somehow these two people in the U.S. substituted this 25% de minimis rule, which doesn't apply to the foreign direct product rule at all. There is no de minimis rule there. If there's a component or technology that is controlled for national security reasons, you don't get to say, oh, well, it was less than 25%. That is a country of origin determination, not an export control issue. So all of that, again, like FTI, sometimes, and it's easy with hindsight, really astonishes me. But what astonished me more is that Bosch chose to so thinly resource something that was so critically important and can't be laid down at the feet of this kind of unpredictable, evolving sanctions rule, right? This foreign direct product rule has been around for a while. The national security issues are there and they're serious. The rule's there for a reason. The Department of Commerce group that monitors this is also open for consultation. Questions could have been asked, but this didn't even seem to need questions. You've got Bosch on one side, Huawei on the other. It seems like if you're going to flag things for extra scrutiny, that would be the transaction. But the fact that they went from 2 to 66, we saw this with a German bank actually as well. If you thinly resource, you're going to pay at the other end. You're going to end up with this huge organization now. And if they put a couple of dozen people at the beginning dealing with these export control issues, they never would have faced this, in my opinion.
So a couple interesting comments from Melanie in the chat. Melanie interviewed to be head of export controls at Bosch, and she said that they had a really small department and they wanted it that way. And to your point, she kind of chimed in. To your point, Karen, she chimed in and said that the foreign direct products rule is a well-known provision for a seasoned trade compliance professional. They should have known about it. So this is not some like obscure kind of thing. This should have been sort of top of mind. And to your point, if you are under-resourced, then you're going to kind of roll those dice. You know what I'm saying? I think the fact that export controls and all these sanctions, like this has kind of moved into this sort of geopolitical realm to kind of a greater degree, perhaps as a function of this administration. And some could argue, or some have argued, that this is kind of foreign policy being pushed through these regulations across different organizations. And so I just think in the current environment, the complexity of this whole thing is really outrun the staffing in most organizations. And I think this resource question that you kind of alluded to, that Melanie brought up in the chat, this is not like a Bosch specific thing. This is sort of a pervasive thing across the economy. The stock market is kind of raging, but if you take out kind of these AI components, it's not raging to that same degree. And I think the reality for a lot of organizations is a lot of belt tightening and a lot of pressure from leadership to reduce costs, to drive more profitability. As lending rates have gotten higher, the cost to borrow is higher. So that kind of leads to this sort of tightening of costs across the organization. And if we're not doing a good job, look, I'm not blaming anybody. I'm just saying from a high agency perspective, like we're each living in our own lives. We're each part of our own programs, and it's on us to make sure that we're framing the impact that we're having right. If we're part of departments that are quick to get downsized, then it's going to create these sort of downstream risks for organizations. And, just because your airbags have never opened, you've never been in an accident, doesn't mean that like that's not a good thing to have, in place. It's easy to underestimate the the value of an airbag or a value of a seatbelt or a value of, a second line of defense type of, department when something bad hasn't happened. And I think it's incumbent on us to continue to try to advocate on the one hand for the value that like we're providing to our organization, bringing things like this, Ethicsverse, radical compliance, the things that are happening in the news as cautionary tales to leadership, because they're probably not, they're not reading about this stuff. Like they don't know about a lot of these risks. It's on us to raise those things. And if we're looking for new jobs, we have to kind of look, I know what it's like to be unemployed. We want to find a new job, but we have to kind of see around the curve for our own careers and not jump into a sinking ship or not jump into a situation where, where you're out of the frying pan into the fire, where it's under-resourced and you're never going to be able to kind of dig out of it,
But also I would say, the most fundamental risk assessment, and you've got to figure Bosch has, got a more sophisticated version, but the most fundamental, where you take your product and you say, what are the risks? What are the likelihood? What's the impact? And what kind of controls do we have in place? If you're producing an export controlled product, you're going to put that in that kind of high risk, high likelihood category, and then put in really good controls and done. Then you're done, right? Your residual risk is really low. And it feels like they missed some part of that, either didn't red flag this is a high risk, or didn't say, wow, this is kind of a high risk thing, which has some no-brainer controls attached to it that we can apply. But also, before we move on, because I took a note here that I wanted to make sure, I would love your thoughts, Nick and Matt, and people listening in. What I'm scratching my head over is how a declination, which is basically saying we don't have a case to pursue here, also comes with a $36 million penalty and disgorgement of profits. Isn't that a non-prosecution agreement? I'm confused.
I did the math on this. So Bosch made $72 million in revenue on these improper sales. And then the criminal penalty, or not the criminal penalty, the disgorgement was going to be roughly $11.4 million. They forgave a significant amount of that. They credited the disgorgement to the civil penalty that the Commerce Department was imposing. And then it was going to add up to about $39 million. And then the Commerce Department gave credit of several million against the remaining disgorgement that they still had to pay. Like, they did all this convoluted math, and I left algebra behind a long time ago. I'm not going back. But at the end of the day, it all netted out to they have to pay $36 million. Almost all of that is a civil penalty plus a small amount of disgorgement. The other one thing that I wanted to raise about Bosch that was interesting was, okay, they reached bad advice and bad conclusions about their exposure here. That was around 2020 that they came to that improper conclusion. Over the next 4 years, 5 separate companies gave them warnings, basically asking, are you sure you are not in violation of the foreign direct product rule? Will you please certify that you're not? Because we think you are, and we don't want to do business with you if you are. And the trade compliance people in Germany, who had been given the wrong advice and reached the wrong conclusion, they looked at all of that and started saying, no, those suppliers are the ones who are wrong. We're fine. And it was the opposite. The suppliers were correct. Bosch was wrong. But they had 5 different companies that at some point basically were nudging them. Are you sure you're reading the room correctly? And Tom Fox and I were talking about this, and he raised the good point that this is really an information and communications problem. If those 5 companies, if their inquiries had ever reached the right people at Bosch, would they have reached a different conclusion? Oh, crap. We messed it up 5 years ago. We need to change our tune. I have no idea how all of this came to be, but it was just striking to see that, there were red flags all over the place. Like, you're walking through communist China, red flags everywhere that they missed. And it's something. And then here they are. So do you, company, have the right internal controls to get the right information to the right people? Can you interpret the right signals to understand what they're saying? And Bosch struggled with that.
Very German of them,
Yeah. Not very German. No process in place.
Better point.
The last point there. In the Bosch learning, it's a small point, but good for compliance officers because we're starting to see this repeated over and over again, is that Bosch got a ton of credit for early voluntary self-disclosure before they had even completed their own investigation. And I don't know how many of us have reported to executive management and boards where the executive leadership and the board would have agreed to that disclosure before the investigation was pretty much completed. So, I guess they did get a lot of credit for that.
They did. And that is also Bolt, the French manufacturer who settled FCPA charges in the first quarter. So there's our FCPA thing. They also did the same thing, and they got credit for it, where they disclosed before they even had finished their investigation and knew where they were going to go. Nick, you were going to say something?
Yeah, I was just going to say that, the declination is great, but it's not a refund. I mean, to what we were just talking about, they still had to cut that check, And so this thing of, we cooperated, like that just can't be the whole strategy. It's like, it's kind of your consolation prize for the prevention you didn't do. I mean, how much worse that they were, multiple suppliers raised this issue and they said, no, we're good. No, we're good. So, it's great they got a declination, but so many of the things that we're talking about could have been prevented. And I think that's really what the angle of this whole conversation is. What can we learn from these, failures or near misses that are happening in other organizations to make sure that our own programs are really dialed in and, bolstered,
Mm-hmm. So next issue that we're going to talk about here is we're going to pivot to antitrust and specifically algorithmic antitrust risk. There we are, new term for the Ethicsverse audience here. This is a phenomena where several companies might be relying on the same AI tool to help them set prices. And the top criminal enforcement guy at the Justice Department for antitrust matters, a man named David Glad, who is, I think, Deputy Assistant Principal AG or some fairly middle to senior title up there. But Daniel Glad basically said this can absolutely be criminal behavior if you are providing very specific information into the AI tool, and then you are relying on the tool to make judgments on prices for you. And if you check out of the price setting decision and you just do what the AI tells you, and so are your competitors, Glad said, we're going to have big problems with that. And he even referenced a case, some of you might have heard about this, but RealPage, which is an AI software system for the real estate world, where landlords, residential landlords, are feeding all of their tenant information into the tool. And then the tool would tell them, so you should charge this much for this tenant or this much for this unit. And 5 or 6 different major apartment owners were all doing this. That became a antitrust matter. It became a big deal. RealPage had to settle. At least 2 out of the 6 real estate firms have settled. And he was warning everybody that you have to be very careful with how you use AI to set prices if you're relying on a generic tool that your competitors might also be using. I thought it was really interesting. And there's also the whistleblower aspect, which I'll get back to in a moment. But I'll stop right there. Karen, give me your thoughts here, because I could easily see that a lot of salespeople might not know that this is what they're doing. And a lot of compliance teams might not know that's what the sales team is doing, which the sales team doesn't know. And now you have a risk and nobody sees it. Karen, what do you think?
Absolutely. I think this can be a question of education, making sure that you're repeating to the sales force things that they don't want to hear because they're very good at not hearing them. And I don't think these are new messages. The sales force always wants to know about competitor data. They think the more data and the fresher it is, the better. My time in the tobacco industry was a perfect example of that. When you have fast-moving consumer goods, if they could have had a second-by-second picture of the competitive landscape on pricing, they would have had it. Fortunately, it wasn't that hard when, you didn't have AI kind of running these scenarios really quickly behind the scenes to set those parameters to say, you can use some historical data, you can use some sort of of publicly available data. And, we set kind of a delay. You can't have second by second. You can't even have the day, but you could have something from last week or last month. So setting those things and literally establishing spreadsheets that gave them at least a degree of satisfaction on available pricing information wasn't that hard. It was education and it was monitoring and it was process. And my concern here is not the whole human in the loop argument. It's the human laziness argument, this kind of set and forget. We're going to just set AI on this. AI is going to do this amazing job at scraping information, finding things, aggregating data, and nobody's ever going to question, whether the sourcing is appropriate. So there's a whole bunch of high-risk behaviors here, but they're not new. They're just, in my mind, exacerbated and somewhat hidden. So a lot more shining the light, a lot more education, a lot of checking in on sales. Where are you getting this information? How are pricing decisions being made? It's that age-old, get that seat at the table. Make sure that you got some input there. But these antitrust risks are not new. They're just more complicated.
Yeah, I mean, I think the issue, as I understood it, is that this AI tool is effectively kind of collusion. It's kind of enabling collusion, pricing collusion or something.
It is doing the colluding for you. You've now outsourced the colluding to the AI tool, and it just colludes with all the data that everybody's been feeding in, and it spits back out the prices. But you're both right here, and so are the listeners commenting. Daniel Glad, the Justice Department official, he expressly said, this was antitrust when it was the 1960s and a bunch of guys at a boozy backroom conference setting prices.
Smoke-filled room.
It's antitrust if you are using AI and not even talking to each other, but the AI is the price setter for you all. It can advise, but it can't decide. That was his big theme. But what I was fascinated by is that, again, it's Daniel Glad who's running this. He's given a couple of speeches now talking about the whistleblower pressures, that he is more than happy to give out individual whistleblower awards on antitrust misconduct to individuals. And he's actually said that creates a second lane of pressure for companies who are colluding. Usually it's the first company that confesses, they get the break. Everybody else gets taken out behind the woodshed. Like, no, now if the whistleblower comes to us individually, none of you are going to get the break because the whistleblower gave me the tip. And I think that's awesome. I mean, he is so gung-ho to try and pull all the levers of pressure to get this information, and it drives up the need for voluntary self-disclosure of antitrust risks, assuming compliance has figured out this is happening. And just give me some thoughts here about how compliance can stay ahead of this.
I mean, there's maybe two, Karen, weigh in, of course. I think there's maybe two kind of angles. Are you doing kind of a risk assessment on pricing strategy? Maybe that's an angle that you need to take in your organization. I think a better one is really kind of taking an AI angle and doing a full inventory of AI use in the organization, and then applying your own risk brain to these different use cases. Hopefully about what's going on, in the marketplace, and cases like this that are being brought up, so that you can see the extent to which there are vulnerabilities at play that maybe leadership hasn't thought about. But doing a full inventory on how are different departments utilizing AI. If you do that right and you get the right engagement, in sort of an AI risk assessment, then you're going to see, okay, everybody is using this AI pricing tool, or these are the kind of various use cases. I mean, the big challenge, which we've talked about in a couple of episodes this year, Matt, is that the use cases are myriad. There are so many AI use cases. People are leveraging AI in so many different ways. Unless you're crowdsourcing that, how are you even going to have any clue? Like, in our organization, there are use cases I don't even know about unless I'm asking about it and I'm finding out, because people have ingenuity, people are creative, they're trying to solve their problems in their niches with the nuance that they know, the nuance that they have for their department or their corner of the world or whatever. So we have to get some visibility into those things. We have to start seeing those haystacks first and foremost before we can start kind of pulling the needles out of them.
Yeah, I fully agree with that, but I also think that this is an area where, unless compliance has got some pretty intense antitrust capabilities in-house, they've got to either go externally or go work with their their law department and their antitrust experts there, because it's designing the whole thing to begin with and making sure that you've got this with the right intentions, but it's examining the outputs as well. Because as far as I understand, and admittedly that's very limited, these algorithms can start developing on their own, and they can start doing these incredibly quick calculations and price adjustments. So you have to look at how is that reflected? Is there stabilization in the market? Are you creating barriers to entry? All those kind of hot button antitrust issues. Is there unintentional collusion, even if you're using some sort of a data broker that your competitors are? So looking both at the input and the design and the use case, Nick, just as you said, as part of a much broader examination of the use of artificial intelligence, I think you also have to keep a really close eye on output and keep questioning and keep examining and then readjusting there. Because I do think this is an area, the more I started looking into it, where companies can unintentionally get into really hot water here.
Well, and there's an inherent from a sorry, go ahead, Matt.
No, you go ahead, Nick.
Whenever I say inherent, something good's coming. I'm just kidding. From like an Econ 101 perspective, in any non-monopoly market, any supplier is ultimately a price taker. And so there is this sort of inherent, I don't want to say pressure, but like a tailwind toward kind of collusive, if that's a word, collusive type behavior, because if you're just a price taker, you're not setting the price for something. You're trying to kind of figure out what is charged for things like this. And when an AI tool comes out that might be untested, as somebody said in the chat, or if our economic systems maturity with respect to AI tools, we haven't sort of pervasively made the connection between using this tool and that smoke-filled room that Matt was alluding to. There's an inherent outsized risk that we're opening ourselves up to that is just kind of flying under the radar until something pops.
Just a couple of more quick notes on the algorithmic antitrust violations. Number one, we are trying to put together a whole Ethicsverse on this very subject in July. So anybody listening, if this is near and dear to your heart and you want to talk about it, please come find me after class. You can email me or track me down on LinkedIn. But we're looking for a few panelists who might want to talk about this. Number two, I have been struck by how quickly this as an issue is proliferating. Is just the other day, I saw there is now a civil lawsuit in California against gas stations that allegedly are using AI to price gouge people for the price of gas out there during the Iran war. And even if this civil lawsuit from, I don't know who the activists are behind it, but even if that goes nowhere, you company, outside counsel is going to bill you $800 an hour at least to tell you that this is going to go nowhere. So you have to really get ahead of these risks while you can. And the last point is that, again, going back to David Glad, when he was talking about this, he did say that AI is going to make these abuses more easy to discover. Because if you have a half a dozen companies conspiring in a smoke-filled room behind, your annual trade association conference, it's like there's a half a dozen guys who know it, and that's it. But if the AI is doing it, the half dozen guys using the system know it, the AI engineers might know it, the third-party vendor that you're using from, they're providing the tool, they might realize it. More and more people might realize it, and the AI is going to generate a system of record that's going to come up in discovery. So
good point.
He was warning people don't do this. On the other hand, he was clearly almost saying I'm more than happy to go to the races with anyone on this. I think that this is going to be a good time. And he's got a big appetite for it. They're looking into at least the meat packing, the egg industry. They've already looked at the real estate industry. There's the civil lawsuit in the gasoline industry. That's 4 right there. And this is a thing that's growing.
Yeah, get the price of beef down, will you?
I think they're working on it. Another issue here, speaking of guidance about please look into this before we enforce against you, the Treasury Department, I was interested to see that they published guidance geared more for financial firms, but I think maybe a lot of companies broadly, how to find sham transactions that are hiding the true beneficial owners of the other person at the other end of your transaction who was sanctioned and now they are restructuring. So it's the person's brother-in-law is now the CEO. And we all know that's bogus. And, clearly the Treasury Department, if they're telling people, here's how you find it, That's a nice way of saying, go look for it, and how companies, compliance teams could try and figure out who really is this other party that we're dealing with. And, it's just going to get harder to do and more serious to do, and you're going to have to dig in a bit more. Do you have the tools for it? So that's why that was on my list here. But like Karen and Nick, what do you think about this issue and the message that they're trying to send?
Questions like beneficial ownership and doing that third-party due diligence has always been a really tricky one. It's hard to scratch, the surface, especially in some jurisdictions, especially in some different legal entity structures. This starts to get even more complicated. And I'm a little bit at a loss in some of the examples that OFAC gave as to how you are going to uncover, without some pretty intense private investigator activity, how title has passed, how things have transferred. And so I'm kind of back to that same old, especially in third-party risk assessment, that's that same old, where is the risk? How critical is this transaction? How risky is the jurisdiction? What industry are we talking about, et cetera, to see if you can select some things for that kind of intense due diligence, even beyond what would be normally available, publicly traceable.
Yeah. I mean, that's a good point. Like, when are you even supposed to roll up your sleeves and dig into this person rather than that person? I don't know. But I mean, Nick, what are your thoughts about how we try and get ahead of this due diligence labor? It sounds like there's a lot of it.
Yeah, I think it's kind of a process or a posture. It's kind of a posture shift from procedural to one of skepticism. It's not like know your customer, but more like, who is this customer really? Maybe it's a higher burden of proof, to your point, which leads to more complexity and, more work and so forth. But, to something you said in your intro on this topic, I think it's giving us some guidance as to whenever they put out guidance, it seems like this is what they're going to be looking for next year. So it's time to kind of reassess how how we might be operationalizing what this new, kind of just assume this is like a new standard. Like, how would we operationalize this new standard? I don't know. I mean, it's kind of a tricky one because this then entails, like, if what I'm saying is right and what, Karen just said is right, then it kind of entails an ongoing monitoring of a lot more things at a much deeper level than the one-time, procedural check the box, kind of pat you down as you're walking into the concert type of screening that we were likely able to kind of get by with before,
Well, in theory, I would say we'll just have AI do it. But that brings me to the last big thing I wanted to cover in the last 10 minutes or so. And I will start by throwing a question out to the audience, if you want to pop this answer into the chat here. In recent weeks or months, are your organizations more concerned about burning through AI tokens and the cost of AI? Because I have been fascinated to see that suddenly everybody is aware that the AI tokens, which are the basic unit of computing power that AI burns through, suddenly that's real. Suddenly all of the big LLM companies out there are passing those token costs on to customers. And so we've seen stories like Uber, which burned through its entire AI budget for the year in 3 months. I know the story of another team where one engineer burned through his entire team's budget for the quarter in 6 hours. Other things like that. I'm not going to name any names, although if anybody wants to confess anything, again, find me after class. But I've been struck that suddenly people are much more price conscious about how much AI really is potentially costing. So then they're starting to think, do we want to ration out tokens? And do we want to give the tokens to cybersecurity teams, or do we want to give it to the compliance team, or do we want to give it to some other team? Do we want to downgrade compliance to use the junky model as opposed to the cutting edge model? Because we need to save money for the cutting edge model for our cybersecurity agents and things like that. And just how much this might complicate the calculus of how are we going to use AI? When are we going to use it? Who gets to use it on what projects? Seems like it's a big budgetary wrench suddenly thrown into the works. Nick, you think about AI all the time. So walk me through this. What's your take on this issue?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a huge issue. I mean, I kind of always start kind of top down. And when you think about the economics of these, these AI organizations, they're a little bit upside down right now, right? They're giving a lot of the token usage is being given away for free. They have to monetize it. They have to monetize it tremendously in order to, make these investments in compute and data centers and all these kinds of things, make sense, right? Like the investors need a return that has to come from monetizing this thing that they're kind of getting everybody a little bit addicted to, right? So there are going to be big shakeups in this thing. Like we have to remember that we're at the early days of this whole thing. I think you and I have talked about this before, Matt, but like when internet first came out, like everybody was on Netscape or something, or like everybody was going to Yahoo or something, right? To Google things. Look at that. And then some of those companies, they end up just sort of like falling away as the world sort of figures out the new technology. And I think we're still at that sort of first layer of a lot of these organizations. They're trying to figure out their business models. They're trying to figure out their investment cycle in terms of like how these dollars that they're putting out are going to come back, and how investors are going to reap those those returns. And so I would expect there to be a lot of these kind of shakeups, a lot of start and stops, a lot of companies being like, let's go nuts with AI. And then like the bill comes in and we're like, hold on a second, shut all the AI off. Like it's going to be more of this kind of whipsawing. And you and I were talking, and I think I read something about this as well. You were giving a use case of, an agent that someone was building to like scrape sanctions or, monitor something twice a day, and it ended up costing like as much as like 2 or 3 heads that could just be dedicated to this thing in total. And I think you're starting to see that like token use, for software companies, token use is outpacing what it would cost to like put a software developer on it. So again, nobody knows how to like ride this horse yet. Like business quote unquote doesn't know how to like adopt this thing at scale. There's a lot of waste happening, a lot of dead weight loss from token spend versus like actual, valid outputs from these systems. And so I think you're going to start to see a lot more clamping down on it, which you're already starting to see, a lot more dialing back on like, the open floodgates that it seems to that have kind of been in place, over the first 2 quarters of this year, when there was all of this push and all these Claude tweets that were wrecking, companies and stuff like that. I think CEOs and CFOs in particular are starting to see that there's no silver bullet to life, right? Like everything's hard, everything's expensive. There's no like magic, dust you can sprinkle on a business to like totally transform it. It takes a lot of like human work and a lot of ingenuity and, points of repeatable process. So I just expect these whipsaws to keep happening. And I expect some of these larger frontier companies to kind of fall away, and there to be an overall democratization of, did I die here? An overall kind of democratization of AI tokens. I think the cost of tokens are going to drop tremendously.
Karen, give me your take about, I don't know, either this issue or how compliance officers can sort of argue their place in the sun because everybody's going to be grabbing for the tokens while they can. Like, what do you think about where we are with this?
Yeah, first, I think it'd be interesting to know from people listening in whether they even have a token budget, whether they've been allocated or even aware that that's an issue. But I think for me, one of the questions, I've been advising quite a few of my clients on the build or buy question when it comes to AI. And, as this issue starts to rise in terms of internal budget, I think it's going to push people into the buy category and kind of shuffle off that cost, at least in terms of what line item it falls under. But then I equally think that the providers are going to be looking to lower their costs. And, Nick, you made some points offline about, finding lower cost providers and just how easy it is to switch. It's just an API switch from one provider to another. Well, I would also then say in the build or buy, in my big long list of questions you have to ask your provider is, when are you going to tell me, how am I going to be able to assess what platform you're using to provide the services to us as well? Because that becomes a kind of ongoing due diligence refresh question. So a lot of complexity there. I just think there's so many incredible use cases for AI and compliance. And so we've got to fight our corner to make sure we've got access to it.
It's interesting to me to see, somebody had said maybe there was a great push in the first couple of months as companies were tying employee incentives and frankly their job and retention to their AI usage. And then that wound up with everybody using AI as much as they could, and the tokens suddenly exploded. There was a famous story about one of the big AI companies themselves had to tell their employees, please stop using AI to ask about the weather, just look out the window. I won't name them, but if you are on Facebook, you can wonder who that might be. But it's stuff like that leaves me curious in how well informed people are to trying to get the total cost of ownership. I don't know that they know. And you could cut it by cutting your usage. You could cut it by reducing the model. And do you need the latest model for all things? Probably not. Do some of your business functions need the latest model? Probably yes. Is compliance? I don't know. Maybe for some tasks, yes. Some tasks, no. The governance of all of this and switching from one model to another is going to be just absolutely huge.
And how do you police it, to your point? How do you police which model guys are using and what their actual spend is?
And who does that? What is the job title of the person who does that? We don't have that yet.
Totally. And so it's hard to project, right? Like it's a new line item essentially on the P&L that, you can project out what labor costs are going to be to some degree, right? If you're a chief technology officer, you know how many heads you're going to need. Like that's an easy thing to project out. This is a new line item that nobody really knows how it behaves because the vectors of like usage by teammates is such a wide variance.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's crazy.
I won't get on this soapbox, or well, I already am. I won't
get up on that soapbox, Matt.
No, this strikes me a lot like when you talk about healthcare policy and people say we need price disclosure for healthcare operations. Well, do I want to pay $1,000 for a knee replacement? Is it an emergency or am I fine? Is it an intern who's 25 or is it a senior doctor who's 56 and has done 1,000 of them? Am I doing it at Mass General, which is the best hospital in the country, or am I doing it at my local guy down the street, which is not the best? And that's all I'll say.
Just watch some YouTube videos.
You have no idea as a common user of how to actually make a judgment about what is the right price for any sort of healthcare. This feels a lot like that to me. But that said, we are out of time. So, Karen Moore, thank you as always. All of our listeners, thank you very much. Nick, if you want to wrap it up and take it home for us, but this has been great.
Yeah, this has been great. I always have high expectations for these. These episodes are always so fun. So round of applause for Karen, of course. Round of applause for Matt. We're at 4,000 emojis. That's always a great sign. If you have not pressed Control-T and jumped over to Radical Compliance, you need to do that immediately. And if you are not following Karen and Matt and me, frankly, on LinkedIn, you absolutely should. I've been trying to write review or summaries of any episodes you may have missed. So the last thing I'll say is that if you like the Ethicsverse, the biggest thing you can do to help us continue to do this is to share your takeaways on LinkedIn, share it with your friends, invite more people to this community that we're building. I remember when we started this a couple of years ago, there was like 30 of us on our first episode, and now some episodes are getting over 1,000. So there are thousands and thousands of people in the ethics and compliance community, and we need to get this tent bigger. We need to get more people in here because the more we can align, the more we can unite on what our industry should be, the faster we're going to be able to make that vision a reality. So hope you can join us for Ethicsverse Day. Please continue to share ideas for future episodes. We want to continue to add value for you all. And we will see you next week. We got a couple of episodes lined up. Hope you can join us. Love you all.
Thank you.